Now this is the first part of building my attic layout. Building the table, laying out the tracks, making the tunnel portals, and doing some of the basic engineering for the table that really took a lot longer than I thought it would. I turned a very odd shaped room with a dormer into my train layout. We had to carry wood up 3 flights of stairs on a ladder. The basic construction, which took a little less than a year if I remember right, and this was 26 years ago. This layout has withstood a lot of running time, I guess is the right word. How I laid out the track, making cardboard templates, the control panel, and how I dealt with the fact that a chimney was riding right up through the middle of the layout. And I think I did a good job overall designing this. I got my first, and this is 26 years ago, I got my first Mike's Train House. I bought 2 engines at the beginning of this, and making the tunnel portals from plaster and some of the other detailing like putting in the Ross switches. Part 1. So it was 26 years ago I got to use this attic room in my house. I had just gotten a house. My son had gone off to college and he was not going to come back and use this room. And I was able to make the layout of my dreams. This was 26 years ago. And as I decided to use this room, I carpeted it first, painted it all light blue, and a good friend of mine, Mike Kajeski, was on board with making me a table that would last for the rest of my life. And this is the story. Now the room is 3 stories up, and to get the lumber we needed into the room, we were using 16-foot beams. Mike Kajeski is a master carpenter, and he decided we wanted to do all of the work with 16-foot beams so that it would not over time warp and become rippled. And it looks, 26 years later, it looks like we made a great decision to do that. And again, we had to climb up, well, Mike had to climb up ladders. With the 16-foot wood, we had to take the windows out. And as I look back over the 26 years, it was raining the day we did this. This was worth every bit of effort. Now, if you have a basement layout, it's a lot easier to get the material in place. Once we got the material in place here, my good friend Rich Jacobone and Mike gave me a hand, and I was able to shoot some video of this. Again, this is 26 years ago that we did this. Now, because Mike and I had worked on other projects around the house, he had put a roof on my house, number one thing, done a lot of work building benches for me in the past. I knew he'd do a great job of actually laying out and making sure this layout was perfectly level, and he put a ridge around the whole room to build a table up on. And we did not skimp on material at all. The material for this job was expensive, but over the years it has paid big dividends. Now I remember many times as Mike was making these beams that went across, one-piece beams that went across the whole span of the room, 16 feet. And I kept thinking, wow, this is overkill. But as years have gone by, it really hasn't been overkill. It's been wonderful that this table has stood the test of time. Number one, you can walk up on it anytime you want. It's super, super strong. And in Mike's case, everything was just like you were building a house. I know most people build a layout don't do this much overkill, but I wanted this layout to be straight and level and true for the rest of my life. And Mike delivered on his promise. Now I was remembering back to other layouts that I had done the construction on, I tried to save money on wood, and I didn't really get the quality of the wood. I was buying wood at places where probably the wood wasn't exactly straight. And what Mike did, and it was a very smart move, he got this from Revell Lumber, this is really high quality wood. And everything is in overkill here. And as the time has gone by, again, I'm so glad I did this, because we had to work around the fact there's a chimney going right through the middle of this room. And all the while he was building this table, which took about a month, if I remember right. He was working after work. We were working on it till late at night. And I remember every time another beam went in and another strut, I'd be thinking, boy, this is going to be nice and solid. I'm not going to have any problem no matter what I want to do scenery-wise on this. And as time goes by, it's not going to turn into with having ripples and warps and different things. And that's the advantage of having an attic layout there's much less moisture. And many times when we were working on us, two of us would get up on the table, it didn't bend even a little bit. So I thought this is really going to be the ultimate foundation for my forever layout. And as 26 years have gone by, again, I have not ever regretted spending the time. And once again, Mike had convinced me to use 3/4 inch high quality sheeting plywood. This was finished plywood on one side. And I was thinking, oh, that's a lot of extra money, but boy, as the years have gone by, it has really proven to be just the best of all worlds. And I remember this just like it was yesterday. As the sheeting was going in and the joints were very, very small, ultimately they got sealed to where when this was done, all the sheeting was done and the edging was put on, I started with an absolutely flat, perfectly flat table that I could walk on. I could put 2, 3, 4 people up there. My grandson could come up and run around on the table. And until I had the scenery built on this layout, I used to walk around on it, and I had the option of just really, really walking anywhere I wanted to, putting in access hatches wherever I thought they'd be important, because this layout ultimately had 3 lakes on it, and one of the lakes is removable as an access hatch. And all of this high quality sheeting, in the end, paid big dividends. No, I don't remember what kind of compound Mike suggested we use, but it worked out great. It was easy to sand. I didn't want to see any of the joints in the final scenery. I didn't want to have a lawn or a road and have a joint come popping out. We used Benjamin Moore paint just to make the whole surface look like earth to start with. And as it turns out, that turned out to be a good investment. Not only that, in keeping the wood as nice and as smooth as possible while I was laying out the track work. I did not want to lay the track work out over joints that weren't perfectly smooth, or any wood that over time would start to warp. Now that really turned out to be, that's a billiard table. And I was going to, at this point in time, I had several ideas for a track plan, and underneath I wanted to have the front wood too, not a curtain made out of material. I also this was to lay out my track plan in real life. This was not computer available back then. And I did it all by making cardboard templates of all the radiuses I might use, and then using up the scrap plywood to make plywood templates to bend the track work, to bend all of the track work that was the Gargraves Flexible Phantom track. And my plan was to lay out a tentative track plan with an ink marker and see how I liked it in real life. Again, I didn't have the computer options that you have nowadays. 26 years ago, they didn't exist. And I thought in the back of my mind, what would be the best thing is lay it all out in center line and just see how it looked and how it felt before I even positioned the switches or the tentative crossover or some of the other things that I had in mind. And this part of the job, laying out the road bed on the center lines, it took much longer than I thought it would, but in the end it paid big dividends. And bending up the track, using those plywood templates that I made to bend the track, I airbrushed the track first so I wouldn't have a problem later on with spots missing or parts that I couldn't get to conveniently. And this all turned out to be such a good investment in time and energy. And Mike made this control panel access, so all the controls, all the electronics, the Mike's Train House things were all not out in the open. And the edge of it, the final edge, was solid wood and wainscoting. And in the end, I had, at this point, I started with having 2 loops of track before I made a final plan for how I wanted to lay out the switches. They're Ross switches, of course. And laying them out in real life, it started at this point in time to take on a life of its own. And then the time of painting the sky. And I'm going to be honest, I painted it. And my late friend George Venturini came over and said, "You can do better than that." And he was a professional artist, and I went and did it over. And I'm glad I did, because once you put the scenery in, it's really hard to do this and do the painting. It's all done by hand. And then it came time to really start looking at finalizing the track plan and getting some of the wiring in. A lot of the wiring really took longer than I thought it would. And since the last time I had built a layout, I had forgotten how much fun it is to do the wiring on a layout this big. And then there's a night I'll never forget. This was such an emotional high because we had worked on this for months. And to get the first train running, I had my first experience with Mike's Train House. I had to get used to the controls. I had to figure out how to use it and all of the things. Up to this point, I had only had Lionel things, and I had quite an extensive collection of Lionel trains, old ones, some even 70 years old. But I wanted to start a collection of Mike's Train House engines, which I now have several of, and I wanted to really get used to all the features. And that first night running the trains, I had invited a bunch of my friends over, and I asked them to bring their trains over. And if I remember right, several of them brought trains, and we were all going back and forth, and how do you do this, and how do you do that? This is the first time I had a Mike's Train House controller in my hand. And this was such an emotional moment, and I just couldn't wait to finish the layout. Now, the layout took a lot of years to finish, but this night I count as the watershed point at which from this point on I could run trains. Now I came up with a plan for the chimney. I covered it with plywood, put molding around the ceiling, and I thought I'd make a big giant factory out of that at some point in time. And I ran it by a lot of my friends that were modelers, and they all thought, that was a pretty good idea. And I had to decide what to do with that. There's a dormer in the house, about a 9 or 10 foot dormer, and I wanted to make some kind of a part of the layout go back into the dormer and a passenger station. Now, because some of the new engines have a giant overhang and they were going to be inside a tunnel, I had made my own tunnel portals. I bought one of each, made a rubber mold and made a bunch of them, and put a finish on them, paintwork. I needed to make sure, and it was critical, that I got plenty of clearance. I didn't want to have it when you went through the tunnel that the back of the engine would rub on a wall or rub on a portal. And it's part of the thing that took longer. I never realized how long it was going to take to fine-tune the track work. Now, a part of the layout that got to be very labor intensive was once I made these plaster parts. Of course, I had a lot of help from Freddie the Parrot, but all of these parts, I wanted to finish them before I put them in place. And again, this took just an incredible amount of time. I just can't imagine. Looking back, I made so many portals because I wanted to line the whole inside of the tunnel. I didn't want to have any part of it without ballast on the track or with the lining in the tunnel. And that really took time. One of the things I underestimated was making these parts. And again, this added quite a bit of time to the job. But I knew from having built other layouts that some of these things, like building a foundation of a house, you get to do them up front. You save a lot of time and a lot of energy. And if you get the finish on them, the paint work, anything you need to do on them ahead of time, it just makes the job that much easier. Now here's a picture of, just for reference point, the molds that I used. They're rubber molds to make the tunnel portals and the walls that line the inside of the tunnel. And I wanted to really detail this out way better than you would normally do on a model railroad, because I knew ultimately I was going to spend an awful lot of time detailing out the layout and doing what I thought was going to be the layout that for me would last the rest of my life. I knew 20 years down the road I wanted this layout to be fully functional, not have problems with the wiring, or that I'd be sorry I didn't do something right up in the beginning before I put the scenery on. And this turned out to be such a good investment in time, energy, and money, because the tunnels on this layout really accent the whole layout. And I think without the tunnels on the layout, it would be so much less interesting to watch the trains run. Now, there was a lot of days when I came up to the layout to work on it, and I wasn't sure what the next step I'd do is. Now, I put all of the tunnel walls inside the tunnel. You can take a flashlight and look in there, and everything is a tunnel wall. And I thought that was important for me because I really liked once all of these base work things are done, I wanted to super detail a layout. And I knew it would take me many, many years to do the amount of detailing I wanted to do. But I wanted to get this part of it done. You can see the inside of the tunnel wall right here. And even though I haven't made the tunnels yet, now it was very, very time consuming adding some of these little details that you almost don't see. But in the end, when the layout was finished and I was running trains, had my friends over for a train running session, I was so glad I did all this work up front and made everything as detailed as I could. Laying out the switches and what amounted to be the final track plan, and we had to make clearance around the chimney, had to make sure I had clearance in all the tunnel portals before I could lay out the lakes on the layout or any of the access hatches. This took way more time than I thought it would, but in the end I was so glad I took my time with the crossovers, number one, and with the final track plan. And this part of it, once I had the table done, I had the controls in place, it was level, it was flat, everything from this point on was very, very easy to do and to lay out where I wanted my crossovers. These are Ross switches with Dell Air controls. The whole thing worked out way better than I ever thought it would. This is the first time I had ever used Gargraves track and Ross switches, and I was really thrilled the way it all worked out. But I had so much more work to do from this point on. This was the fun part of it, was getting the trains running, and from this point on the years just seemed to go by little as I did the scenery and did many of the custom unique features that are part of this layout. And this is actually the end of part one. I did not want the videos to get too long, so I'm just going to run the trains a little while and hope you enjoyed the video. Now we have a lot of model train videos out there already. If you're interested in watching this layout run in real time, they're on our channel. There's over 3,000 videos. Search the channel with the word O-Gauge and you should be able to pick up all of these videos. all that footage from many years ago brings back great memories of building this layout, and it has stood the test of time. 26 years, going on 27 now. Model trains, model railroading has been a passion for in my family with my grandson many years. He grew up around this layout, and I'm so glad I built it, and I'm so glad I built it right. And this part, building the table, was the foundation of many years of enjoyable model railroading. So I hope you did enjoy it. Hope you'll check out some of the other videos on our channel. I appreciate it if you hit the like button, and thank you for watching.